So as we closed up yesterday, I kind of teased what we were going to be talking about next with the Neanderthals. Before we jump into that fun, I want to just go back to this slide for a moment. I touched on it briefly on how when we look at mitochondrial DNA, we see three female lineages in this world today. We see the L, the M, and the N. That should not surprise us because we know there were three childbearing ladies who walked off the ark. So one thing that I don't think I mentioned though is if you look at this chart, each and every one of these groups of lineages come back to one, which is exactly what we would expect because of course all men and women come from Adam and Eve. So that's another point in the direction of biblical history. And again, that should not surprise us. If the Bible really is reality, we expect to find results like this. So as advertised last time, let's talk a little bit about Neanderthals. So this is a pretty common version of what you're going to see if you walk through a museum and you see a Neanderthal display. This is the kind of image that you'll usually come across. So what about these Neanderthals here? From this slide, go ahead and write down the title and everything underneath it. There will be some more that will fill in under here. So when your grandparents were in school, this was the view that would have been taught to them. Back then, people believed that Neanderthals were just these cave-dwelling savages, and they were basically just animals. And they kind of sounded like this, and that's all that they talked. And you'll see that sometimes in movies and things like that. And the old view is that they were destroyed by Homo sapiens. By the time your parents were in school, this idea was known to be wrong, but they were probably still taught it. It takes a while for this information to find its way out of the educational system and out of museums. By the time you guys are in school, everybody should know, hopefully, that this is not what Neanderthals were all about. So, what's the deal with Neanderthals? You can write that down, please. You know, a very common thought back in the day was that Neanderthals were the missing link between humans and apes. They were that stepping stone before we finally came into our modern human form. But when we actually do our research, our diligent research, and we look at what's actually there in the evidence, what we find is that these Neanderthals created paintings, musical instruments, cosmetics. They wore makeup and they did their hair. They buried their dead in a ceremonial manner. They had funerals. They had the controlled use of fire. They interbred with Homo sapiens. In other words, folks, can you finish that sentence for me? In other words, they were human. Go ahead and write this down. Neanderthals were just one of the people groups that went out from the Tower of Babel event, and it was generally a small population. Most likely what happened to them is that they were absorbed into larger human populations that probably came into the area where they were living. So if you see images like the first one, where you have a Neanderthal looking kind of like this ape-human hybrid, if you see that in a museum, that museum is being very dishonest. Honest museums with modern technology and a modern understanding of what Neanderthals were will display them exactly how we know they used to look back then, which looks like this. You wouldn't know the difference if you saw a Neanderthal walking across the road. So, questions on this before we continue?
So this like real facts?
Yeah. It's so difficult for the scientific community to get away from the idea that Neanderthals are these subhuman missing links between humans and apes, even though they know for sure that they're not from the scientific data. If you Google it, you'll find that they are not the missing link. They are, in fact, human. But it's such a nice little tidy story for them, isn't it? That we have this hybrid human-ape thing, and it matches up so well with what they want us to believe in terms of their naturalistic philosophy that it's very difficult for them to let go of that. And it's very difficult for them to correct museums and textbooks that say something that goes the opposite direction. So it's what we find is that even when the information is apparent and it goes against that idea, it's very difficult to overcome that in the popular media. In order to continue our discussion here, let's imagine you have graduated college, okay? And you want to work for a really good company, all right? What sort of company, like let's say they're making something that you're really interested in. Maybe they make t-shirts, and you're like, I really want to work for a good company that makes t-shirts. And so you're looking across the spectrum in terms of what these businesses are doing, and you're looking at, what's going on in terms of their t-shirt making abilities, and you find two companies, okay? One company you find has a 20% growth rate every year in their revenue from making t-shirts.
Is that not good?
Well, that's pretty darn good. 20% growth, a lot of companies would kill for that. Meanwhile, you find another company, and their growth over the last 3 years or so has been 5%. Which of these companies will you go work for?
20. You can pay more.
Generally, you're going to pick the one that's seeing the higher rate of growth there, right? But there's a lot of information we don't know. What if you find out later on that, this 5% company that's increasing their revenue 5% every year is making like $1 billion of income for that business every year, and that amount of money is growing by 5% a year. And then you look at this company that's boasting that they're increasing by 20% every year, and they're only making $200 a year in revenue. Are you still going to want to work for that company? Right. Probably not. And so the thing is here, folks, sometimes numbers can be very deceiving. We're comparing apples to oranges here, really. If you're talking about a billion-dollar income company versus one that's pulling in maybe $100 or $1,000 some dollars a year. So you have to make sure that you're aware of that. Have you ever heard the phrase, numbers lie and liars use numbers? Okay. That happens in the scientific community too. How many of you have heard that humans and chimps are 99% similar in their genetic makeup? A couple people. Okay. That is an example of people using deception along with those numbers. Now, most people, when they repeat that, they don't realize that it's deception because they haven't done the research themselves. But let me show you where these numbers come from. I happen to have in my possession, and I'm going to turn the lights on here for the folks at home, since it's being recorded. I have in my possession an entire human genome. I even labeled it human DNA. 3 billion letters of genetic information right here in the human genome. I also happen to have a chimpanzee genome. And here it is, chimp DNA. These look 99% similar to you. Why not? It's way shorter. It's not 99% the length of our genome. And there's no way it could be 99% similar because you're missing so much. Folks, there are entire gene families that we have as humans that apes do not have. Things that code for stuff in your brain that includes, language and abstract thought, the being able to comprehend beauty and things like that, and many others. There is not the same amount of genetic information in chimp DNA. They just don't have it. So the question becomes, where does this 99% come from? Because clearly, we've got more genetic information. There's no way they could be 99% similar. Well, sometimes numbers can be deceiving. That 99% number comes from, if you take from chimp DNA here, and you snip out the part of the chimp's genetic code that codes for fingers, and you compare that to the part in human DNA, and you snip that out to the part that codes for fingers, they will indeed be 99% similar. If you snip out the part that codes for eye formation in chimps and eye formation in humans, yes, they will be 99% similar. They're the same thing. But you're not going to get 99% similarity overall. And that's the real thing we need to compare here. So that 99% number is extremely deceiving. There's a lot of information in our genetic code that monkeys don't have. And nobody ever talks about that because everybody wants to forward this idea that we're basically the same thing as monkeys when we're not. We've got so much more genetic information that does so much more for us than the chimpanzee family. Now, how many people have heard that you are 50% similar to bananas? Yeah, me too. Well, guess what? I have a strand of banana DNA. Is there any way in the world that human DNA can be 50% similar to banana DNA? Hi there. Thank you. Anthony. Of course, the answer is no, because there's a heck of a lot more genetic information in the human genome than the banana genome. So you're not 50% similar. Again, where does that number come from? It comes from if you look at the banana genetic code and you snip out the part that codes for something that we share, like, bananas have cells, we have cells, maybe the part in both of those that code for cell replication, yeah, they'll be 50% similar. They do the same thing. But you're comparing, I was going to say apples to oranges. You're comparing bananas to humans. They're two completely different things. You are not half banana, so don't worry. Do you see what I'm trying to say here? Does this make sense? Good. Again, when you hear that 99% number, it's all just about snipping out the parts that are similar in those two genetic codes and ignoring the parts that aren't similar. When you don't ignore the parts that aren't similar, you get a much different story. Roughly 80 to 85% similarity there. You're going to have to write this whole thing down, please.
Setting up a model.
80 to 85%. So this is basically what I just said. The claim is that humans and chimps share 99% of their DNA, and the reason that that's claimed is because they want us to believe so badly that humans branched off of a chimp-like creature. And if we're 99% similar, how could we not have, right? If we're basically a chimp just 1% away. But you are way more than 1% away from being a chimp. This is a false statement. It's based only on a very particular group of genes that both species have. There are entire gene families found in humans that are not in chimps. You can do so much more, not just physically, but mentally, than a chimp can do. the actual similarity, when you consider the entire genome of both creatures, is 80 to 85%. Again, folks, when you see numbers like this, let's say you're 99% chimp, or let's say you're 50% banana, you know you're not 50% banana. So when you see numbers like that, and something in your mind says, hey, that doesn't quite add up, I don't really believe that, chances are you're right. And chances are they have some stupid stipulation in here, like bullet point number 3 here, that they're not telling you. So you have to be on your toes when they throw these numbers at you. Numbers can be very deceiving. But the cool part about these numbers is we can actually see how different we are from chimps and whether or not it is realistic that over 5 or 6 million years we could have evolved from them. So let's take a look at that. So 80 to 85% difference between us and chimps. So what does that come to when you actually analyze the entire genetic code of a human being and a chimpanzee? Well, remember, we have about 3 billion single letters in our DNA. That comes to a difference of about 35 million single letters. All those changes had to occur in the 6 million years of time that we've supposedly been branching off from our ape ancestors. So we can actually calculate how many creative mutations had to occur for us to be the way we are over that period of time. So let's just see what would have to happen here, okay? Anybody have a calculator on their phone handy?
I got it.
Okay, thank you. So do 35 million.
That's a lot.
Actually, this is 35 million and this is 6 million. So you could just do 35 divided by 6. What's 35 divided by 6? 5.9. Okay.
5.83, liar. It's not
Okay.
5.9.
Keep that number on your phone, 5.83. So what this means is that every 5.83 years, we need a single letter creative mutation to give us a piece of genetic information that wasn't already there. That needs to happen every roughly 5.83 years, every 6 years or so. So we really want to give the naturalistic storyline the best chance of being plausible here. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to assume that in these 6 million years, we're going to say 6 million years because that's kind of on the high end of time. We want to give them as much time as they need. And we're going to say that over that period of time, the average generation of our monkey/human ancestors was 13 years. In other words, you were on average 13 years old when you had kids. So what I need you to do with that 5.83 number is I need you to multiply it by 13. Okay? 75.83. So roughly 75. That's where this number comes from. So that means every generation you need 75 exactly perfect creative mutations to give you those letters that weren't originally there in the monkey genome out of the 100 that are passed on to your offspring. So you need 75 of those 100 to be perfect, good, creative mutations every single generation. So then the real question becomes, when we analyze this in the real world and we look at the mutations that are occurring from one parent to their offspring, how many are creative? How many actually give you genetic information that wasn't there before? And the answer to that question is less than 1 beneficial mutation per generation. And 1 is being generous. It's really like on average 0.00001. Remember, mutations are bad. They are genetic copy errors. They destroy things. They mess things up. They don't usually create things. So this is the current rate, 1. This is the rate you would need over those 6 million years to get the genetic code of a human being from a monkey. Does this sound reasonable? Everybody should be shaking their heads. No way No way. Mathematically, too. So it's not just using logic and reasoning to show how you're not a monkey and they're not your super great grandparents. You can use math to show it, too. So this is Charles Darwin. He says, if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. And next I have a quote from Dr. Robert Carter. We talked about him briefly at the start of day one, PhD geneticist. He says, I know this quote, the one from Darwin, has been misused by both sides over the years, but I still claim the human genome is such a thing. I do not believe it could possibly have originated through naturalistic processes. I challenge the evolutionists to give us a workable scenario of genomic history, including the source of informational changes, an account of the amount of mutation necessary, and description of the selective forces necessary, all within the proper time frame. Indeed, I challenge them to come up with a way that the genome, any genome, first appeared, arising from scratch in a world otherwise devoid of instructional information. And so again, folks, it's not just the naturalistic story having the issue of getting the genetic code out of nowhere. Because if you do have this genetic code in simple creatures that have been evolving for millions and millions of years, and we've been evolving from a monkey-like creature for the last 6 million, we wouldn't still be here. Because remember, with these mutations accumulating in our offspring every subsequent generation, that makes our species worse over time. We are going down, not up. We're getting worse, not better. And that's the exact opposite of what the naturalistic storyline requires. Now here's our summary. Before you start feverishly writing the whole thing down, though, I want you to read it through, and I have a question for you about it. You've got 10 minutes, and again, there's not as much writing here as it looks like because this font really stretches out these words. So just take a minute, read it through, have a quick question, and then you'll have about 10 minutes to get it all written down. Yeah, you'll be writing the whole thing down. And remember, your summaries go in a nice special place, separate from your notes. But again, yeah, read it through once before you start writing. I just have a quick question. As you finish reading it, I'm just curious if a certain sentence or phrase really jumps out at you as being the most important of the bunch. Because one certainly does for me, and I'm curious if anybody would come up with it on their own. What do you think? What is the most important of all of these phrases here? Yes?
It might not be the most, but it was, things are added every generation.
Sure. 100 new mutations every generation. That's a big one. Others, yes?
Genetic lineages match up with
Now that's a good one, isn't it? Others. All right. So if I'm just kind of looking at ways that I can summarize the summary here and just put this all into as simple terms as possible, I only see 3 words up here that I would say are my favorite. And these are certainly awesome. I love these phrases. seeing how everything matches up perfectly with the biblical version of history. Again, that shouldn't surprise us, but it is neat to see when we see it over and over again. And these 100 new mutations being added per generation, absolutely. That's super important. If I could sum up this section in 3 words, it would be this. When you look at the genomes of each and every animal in our world today that's living, they are going down, not up. And if genomes are going down, not up, the grand story of millions and billions of years of evolution can't be true. Because things are getting worse, not better. Alrighty, finish up writing, and that'll be good for today. You don't have to circle or underline anything. I was just curious.